welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Lisa Beth Kovetz. We are back with psychiatrist Dr. Mark D'Agostino of Bluestone Psychiatry, and we're going to continue our conversation with a look at some of the issues surrounding fear and psychic trauma. Mark, thanks so much for sticking with us for 2 shows.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Netflix has a new film called Uncle Frank that stars one of our favorite guests, the amazing Lois Smith, and there's some other people too. It's written and directed by Alan Ball, and it's an intergenerational road movie about a gay man, his lover, and his niece returning home for a cruel father's funeral.
Oh, Mom. Beth, I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone in the family about me.
You want to stay by yourself in a motel?
Uncle Frank is staying there too. So is Wally. Who's Wally?
What is the relationship between the two of you and the young lady over there?
Oh, she's my niece.
I'm his nephew.
That doesn't sound right.
That sounds wronger and wrong.
You're not gonna run away from this your whole life. Frank! You need to be part of your family.
I don't want to be a part of my family.
It's a lovely film about a lot of things, but I want to talk about the way it depicts intergenerational injuries. Mark, along with our genes, do we inherit and pass on psychic injuries to our children?
It's a very complicated question that brings up, intergenerational or transgenerational transmission of trauma. So as the name implies, it is asserted that kind of trauma can be transferred between generations. So, for example, after a first generation of survivors experienced trauma, they are thought to be able to transfer this trauma to their children and even further generations of offspring via these kind of complex post-traumatic stress disorder mechanisms. Now, like almost anything, there is some debate regarding the mechanisms, but it is fairly widely observed and accepted that this occurs. So at a high level, is this sort of classic and I think now oversimplified notion of nature versus nurture. And that from a nurture perspective, it makes sense that children of parents that exhibit post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, especially if it's prolonged and during important times from a development standpoint, may manifest some of those traits and symptoms themselves. The trauma can also, think about it, become a part of that family's narrative and their identity, so to speak, and can impact how they view themselves as well as the world. There's more to the story, however. There are animal models now that suggest that the epigenome, which can be kind of thought of broadly as the kind of multiple biological factors that affect how genes are turned on, turned off, or modified, that those can be passed down through multiple generations. So I think the point here is that the environment in which we grow up and live can have a significant impact on the genes that manifest. So in the sense, kind of nature and nurture are involved in this complicated dance that can contribute to the transfer of trauma between generations.
And when you say genes, you're talking about a physical manifestation that changes the individual gene line, changes the children physically?
So this is where there's genes, there are genes, which is, with chromosomes, genes, et cetera. And then there's what's called the epigenome, or epigenetics. And this is grossly oversimplified. There will be scientists who will listen to this and say, really, that's how you're going to explain this, Dr. D'Agostino? Sometimes they'll use terms like caps, but really the point is that I almost think of it sometimes like these are the red lights and green lights, meaning like, okay, this green light, this gene that encodes for this protein this is going to be activated. This one will be off, hence the red light, green light. And sometimes they'll also be modified, things called histone modification, methylation. There's all these other things where you can get into the weeds here, but I'm not sure that that's helpful for this conversation. But I think is really understanding that it's when we talk about epigenetics, it's not just a cool word, it's really like which genes are being activated, which genes are being turned on and turned off. And this is where environment has a huge impact. And this is also where, and of course, there are studies that are ongoing, but there were like real animal studies that have shown this to be, the case that have really strongly suggested that really the epigenome and this pattern of turning proteins on and off is really involved in that intergenerational transmission of trauma. And so it's fascinating work. It's early on, and we need to do more, but it really appears, based on the study so far, that it goes just solely beyond that nurture argument, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Well, I'm gay, and so is Wally. And we lived together, we have for 10 years.
In the movie, Frank and his boyfriend Wally have a fabulous life in New York, away from all the dangerous, hurtful people that they love. But in an extraordinary, warm, wonderful moment played by Peter Mafdisi.
Wally? Oh, hey! You forgot your razor.
Given the chance to have a family, Wally is delighted to embrace the idea, even if they're not his own. And this year, both the weight and the importance of family have never been more apparent. Some of us are crushed in together with loved ones, while others are forcibly estranged. And I got to tell you, Mark, my adult children are about to move home. So
Good luck, Lisa Beth.
So how do we not mess up our kids with their own psychic injuries?
What an enormous question. It's an important one. And this is going to sound like a punt, but there are probably as many answers to it as there are children and parents in the United States. So I will refrain from providing a one-size-fits-all answer. But what I will add is so much of what we do, all of us do, and experience, what drives our behavior is not necessarily conscious. So to start, if we are not aware of our behaviors, it is, of course, difficult to change them. I think it just stands to logic. So starting with our own mental health is paramount. Also, stigma around mental illness still exists, and especially in some families and even kind of certain, I guess we'll call them subcultures, even though we as a culture are making some advances, I would argue. But so creating a safe and validating environment within the home is also critical, because there's people that we all know and love that are silently suffering. And so we need to make it safe for them to be able to seek care.
Okay, so we're all someone's children, and we all inherit our parents' injuries. And is it a huge turning point in the lives of your patients when they recognize that some of their traumas are inherited?
That's an interesting question. So I typically, to be honest, I typically don't frame it like that, in part because it could lead to sort of unintended consequences and strains within relationships. But what I do find is that many of my patients really embrace the kind of link between their lived experiences and the neuroscience behind it. Just to going back to science, which is why we're all here. So when they start with the question, well, is it all in my head? I typically tell them a resounding yes. But along with every memory they've ever had, the coordination of every step and action they've ever taken, every perception, everyone and everything that they've ever loved, like everything is in there. And so sort of from there, they go, okay, you know, that at least gets a little bit of credibility. And from there, we can then link this conversation with the genetics of mental illness, the heritability of mental illness, you know, meaning this, you know, this goes beyond the epigenetic conversation we had about the intergenerational transmission of trauma to the true, you know, as everyone knows, if mom and dad have an increased risk of bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, the kids are more like, and substance uses, et cetera. And so really, so from there, so we link that, you know, the genetics of mental illness with the functioning of the brain, as well as its connections throughout the body, as well as the data regarding the efficacy of the treatment. So kind of closing that loop, you know, and really talking about the kind of neuroscience, the genetics, okay, the functioning of the brain, the connections throughout the body, and the data regarding the efficacy of treatments. I've had many find that very reassuring and very validating. And so that's really how I tend to approach that. And so I don't typically frame it as more that their trauma is inherited per se, but you know, I'll sort of steer it in that direction, if that makes sense.
Psychiatry seems to be an incredible balance beam of hard sciences, hard medical sciences, and the more gentle, softer social sciences of human interactions. How do you stay on that balance beam with the patient, or do you even have to?
The balance beam, I think, for me, and obviously everyone's practice can be a little bit different. I think that's perfect. The way that I've mentioned it when I've had people say, you know, I like to, as you've probably seen, I like to give sort of simple ways of summarizing things at times. And they say, what is it you do? And sometimes they say hardware and software. And I think that's in a sense summarizing, and without talking too much about self, You know, like having been a biochemist at first, you know, and I did, you know, physics, and I had published in surface science, and like done that sort of work, and that's sort of my background, and ended up coming to psychiatry later. You know, I didn't know there's some people who come in through the social sciences, having come in through the sort of hard sciences, so to speak, to your point. No, you're exactly right. And it's the type of thing that I didn't appreciate, I'll be very honest, during medical school. And it's the type of thing now that some of the most difficult work I've done, it's really not when it comes to medications and receptor physiology and medication interactions and a lot of that stuff that may sound more technically difficult. Once you do it enough times, it's actually not that tricky anymore, to be honest. I mean, obviously there's always going to be nuances, and people will disagree with that statement. But at least for me, I find that because it's really trying to, when you're working with people and you're understanding emotion, and like there's just, you think of how many variables are involved in everything that they say and do, and there's so many unknowns, and it's one of the most complicated systems that exist. And so when you're trying to understand what's going on, you know, at a neurochemical and a neural network perspective, you know, from a neural network perspective, while at the same time, like this is a feeling human being that's right there in front of you, a feeling unpredictable human being. And so when you say a balance beam, I think that's exactly right, because there's that, you know, sort of moving in and out of these, you know, kind of, I guess, and it's going to sound a little strange, but kind of letting more light in, if that makes sense, like changing the aperture, like sometimes be thinking at the molecular level and then going up and looking, this is an individual who's actually part of a network and part of a family, you know, and so you're beginning, you know, so you're exactly right, is that you have to find that balance. But for me, that's the most rewarding part and most challenging part of this field.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a cardiologist. He said he describes himself as a extremely good, very skilled mechanic. But he's successful because he's devoted to the humanity of his patients. You know, that it makes all the difference. Yeah. Writer-director Alan Ball describes Uncle Frank as a movie about healing, and movies are good at compressing difficult, time-consuming events and changes into easily understood bites, but real life is bigger and messier. So what's your advice for how we just start a healing process?
Wow. If you'll indulge me for a moment, Lisa Beth, your question kind of brings up why I ended up going into psychiatry to begin with. You know, so as I mentioned, I was an active duty physician in the U.S. Army doing a mix of, you know, emergency medicine, some kind of general practice, as well as kind of administrative functions. Working at Walter Reed Army Medical Center at the time that, you know, we were very active in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then being in the field, so to speak, we saw so many horrific physical injuries. However, again and again, began to see it was that the emotional trauma is what often led to the soldier's death. And kind of witnessing and experiencing the 360-degree impact that mental illness, substance use disorders, and suicide had is actually what led me to train as a psychiatrist after I left active duty. And so then when it comes to starting the process of healing, which is something that we saw so many times, is really critical. I said it before, and it sounds oversimplified, but it's true, is it's really to reach out for help. I can't really stress that enough, because those people that are hesitant to reach out, and then it's a lot in a military standpoint too, where they just, whether it was bravado, but part of it is sort of culture too. You know, they end up suffering, and many of them will end up dying. And so that bottom line is just to really reach out for help. That's that critical first step.
You know, this has been a miserable year for so many of us, but of course, doesn't compare to the traumas of war, but I would assume that ask for help would apply to those of us needing to heal from this year.
Absolutely.
Do you think, Mark, we're going to be sharing this trauma for generations to come?
It's really so hard to say, but what this does bring to mind, what that question brings to mind, is really the other side of trauma, Beth, which is kind of post-traumatic growth. Which kind of post-traumatic growth can be thought of as, you know, positive change that's experienced, you know, really as a result of the struggle with a major life crisis or a traumatic event. So it doesn't all necessarily need to be post-traumatic stress. There can be growth. And to sound unapologetically Pollyannish, we can all, I'm an optimist at heart. We can also work to use this time and these experiences to kind of double down on what matters the most. That's kind of relationships, love, appreciation for what we have, embracing of new ways of connecting with others. So yes, I think we'll be sharing this for generations to come, but it is possible that we could, and especially now, there is some genuine hope for vaccines around the corner. I mean, I'm not sure when this is going to be aired, but, there is really hope, in the future. And so it doesn't all necessarily need to be bad. This could be framed as a time when we really begin to focus a little more on what matters.
To my oldest son, Francis Mackenzie Bledsoe Jr., I leave nothing but disgust with the filthy and unnatural perversion he engages in with other men, and shame that he carries my name.
What?
In the movie, Frank's father is unforgivably cruel, but writer-director Alan Ball and Stephen Root give the character Mac Daddy a poignant moment of sorrow, and Lois Smith's Aunt Butch tells Frank she feels for his soul, giving their cruelty some context, but even so, they're still jerks. Some of the criticisms of this movie, Uncle Frank, involve around the forgiveness of that Frank feels for his living relatives after they've been so cruel to him for his whole life.
I never knew why Daddy Mac was so mean to Uncle Frank. He was the kind of person I wanted to be. Smart and funny and considerate.
You're gonna be the person you decide to be, or you're gonna be the person everyone else tells you are. You get to choose.
This concept of forgiveness that we're sold culturally, that we need to forgive in order to improve our own lives, not necessarily entirely valid. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So what I'll just say from a clinical perspective and working, with patients, especially when it comes to trauma, working through post-traumatic stress, complex post-traumatic stress, we often don't stress forgiveness of the perpetrator, so to speak. Really, it's a lot of the treatments, the evidence-based treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma is it's reprocessing. And forgiveness is not necessarily, for some people that may be important, and this is obviously a highly individualized process, but we don't necessarily need, or the patient does not necessarily need to forgive, so to speak, to move through it. They can reprocess in so many different ways. And there's treatments like EMDR, which some people may have heard of, prolonged exposure, and it was CPT. There's other evidence-based treatments that people can look up for PTSD. But I think in short is that I wouldn't want people to necessarily say, well, I can never forgive this person, so therefore, I'm going to keep that with me. It's like, well, no. Like, I would never want anyone to have that thought in their mind that would stop them from seeking treatment, if that makes sense. Because there are other wonderful evidence-based treatments that can save people's lives. And forgiveness is not necessarily critical for people to move through the trauma, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I think it's a huge step forward.
Oh.
Heart attack just out of nowhere, getting into the car.
And in the movie Uncle Frank, there are big psychic attacks on who and what Frank is, but there's also these small, consistent and wearing attacks. And for many of us, the limitations of this long pandemic, and it's like an assault in slow motion in a certain way. What are some of your thoughts on the kind of long-term, ongoing, wearing psychic attack?
Right. So I think part of the reason that kind of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, had become one of the most important and damaging injuries of kind of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, they call them OIF, OEF, Iraq, Afghanistan, is that soldiers and Marines, everyone had to continually return to the same or similar environments in which the original trauma had occurred, if that makes sense. So this continual re-experiencing, in my estimation, kind of had exacerbated the extent and severity of the symptoms. And so even though, and I think you said it before, and I agree that I don't think this can be fully compared to war. I don't think that's fair, and I would agree with your characterization. When I think of long-term, ongoing, wearing psychic trauma, I think that's where this was not just if this was a short-term, okay, we had 1 month, we wore a mask, we got scared, everything's fine now, everything's good, then it would just fade. I think the fact that this is extended as long as it has, and there have been hundreds of thousands of American lives that have been lost. And so this is this has really, changed our way of life in so many ways. And so for that, I think this is, this is going to be with us for some time, but then as also said above, it doesn't necessarily need to be, all bad. There can be some post-traumatic growth as well.
So many of our fictions reward courage. We're told in story after story to embrace fearlessness and go out and try this or that. But in real life, what is fear, and is it useful to us?
So in my medical career, I typically don't quote John Mayer. Okay, as much as a shock that is. Yeah, no, but he once sang, it was kind of fear is a friend who's misunderstood in one of his songs, and it's actually one of the few lyrics he said that really stuck with me. And I think in healthy doses, I tend to agree with the esteemed Dr. Mayer. I was kidding, but fear, it's a very important evolutionarily conserved survival response that helps to keep us safe and alive. And so I think that the issue really arises when fear becomes paralyzing, and it impacts our daily life, and even beyond just daily life, our daily functioning. And so I think then that's when it gets to a disorder, and whether, these could include generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, et cetera. There's multiple in that sort of, in that characterization. But I think we have effective treatments for anxiety disorders of all types that include kind of lifestyle modifications, psychotherapy, medication. So if someone, is really experiencing symptoms that impact their daily life as well as functioning, it's really important to reach out for help. I feel like you were going to say something.
I just want to know, how do we know when a healthy fear tips into anxiety or problematic territory?
Absolutely. And so this is where it's when you look at the DSM, which is, now we're at the DSM-5, which is where you look at the way that a lot of, psychiatric illnesses are sort of diagnosed. Now, a lot of these are categorical, check the box. We acknowledge that a lot of the world is dimensional, and it's a lot more complex than a checklist. We understand that. This is just for ease. But when you look, really, one of the things that's key to essentially every illness that exists is that it's impact on your life. It's impact on functioning that's causing distress. So there are some people that will have thoughts and they may have concerns, but when you think about it in the whole scheme of things, their life is functioning well, then that may not reach criteria for it to be clinically significant. They may be experiencing this, not to minimize it, but we don't want to over pathologize, human behavior. So to your question, is really when it begins to impact daily life, when it begins to impact daily functioning, or even, it doesn't even necessarily need to be daily, like when it really begins to have a significant material impact on your life.
Right. So if you're afraid of the water, but you swim when you have to.
Mm-hmm.
Not
rather than if you say, no, I won't get on an airplane because we may fly over water, and
right.
if I touch the water and then I need to wash my hands 14 times and do X, Y, like you then sometimes then it can get into almost like an obsessive compulsive, where then you'll begin to develop other compulsions, which is another, that sort of anxiety disorder spectrum. But I think you see the point is that it's different, but when it's causing disorder in your life, that's when it becomes a disorder. That makes sense.
Mark, once again, we are out of time, and I have had such a good time talking to you. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.